The story began quietly, the kind of quiet that hums beneath the ordinary sounds of a neighborhood. It was early spring when the new owners, a couple from Seattle, moved into the long, low-roofed house once belonging to Tom Petty. The place was famous among local session players, a 1950s ranch tucked behind a thicket of old sycamores, with a recording studio at the back and a turquoise pool that still caught the afternoon sun like a mirror. In the first week, nothing unusual happened. Contractors came and went, air filters were changed, and the couple spent evenings listening to Free Fallon echo faintly from the open windows. But on the 8th night, a low rhythmic clicking began from inside the studio, the kind that sounds like a tape reel engaging. The husband checked the door, it was locked. The equipment inside hadn't been powered in years. Neighbors later said they'd heard faint guitar notes coming from the property before the move-in. "Thought it was just a demo track looping," said Marcy, who lived across the street. "You could tell it wasn't a radio. It had space around it, like someone was in there." The couple dismissed it at first: old circuits, temperature changes, air pressure in the recording booth. But the sound returned the following nights, always between 11:40 p.m. and midnight, always the same soft twang, cut short like someone lifting their fingers from the strings. They brought in an electrician to check the grounding and a home inspector to test the humidity. The report showed elevated moisture in one corner of the studio, right where the vintage control board stood. The inspector noted a faint smell of burnt dust, like old amplifier tubes warming up. The wife, curious, started leaving her phone recording overnight. Each morning she would scroll through the waveforms. On the third night, at exactly 11:43 p.m., a small burst of static appeared, followed by a single voice, low and slightly slurred. "Turn it down, not yet." Experts later said it could have been radio interference from a nearby ham operator. But there was no tower within half a mile. As weeks passed, subtle changes crept into the house. Light switches flipped themselves off, the pool's filtration timer reset to play old tracks of Learning to Fly from an unseen Bluetooth device, and the studio's red, recording bulb disconnected years earlier, began to glow faintly whenever the couple argued. It wasn't frightening, exactly, more like the space itself refused to forget what it was built for. By midsummer, the husband had begun cataloging every event, photographing the dials, wiring, and timestamps. His notes read more like a sound engineer's log than a paranormal diary. June 12th, light flickered on studio. 11:42 p.m. hum frequency, 60 Hz. Room temperature drop, 4 degrees Fahrenheit. He wanted proof not of ghosts, but of continuity. Something still alive in the circuits of that room. And then came the night when he found the fader pushed up on track 3 labeled in faint marker, Echo TP. The next weeks turned into a strange pattern of half-silence and restless nights. The couple, Eli and Marlene, had begun to avoid the back of the house after dusk. The studio, once meant to be the heart of their new home, now felt like a sealed-off lung that still breathed without them. Eli worked from the kitchen counter, where he could see the glass door leading out to the pool, and beyond it, the faint outline of the studio through the citrus trees. In daylight, it looked ordinary. Stucco walls, faded red tiles, sun-warped wooden doors. But at night, something about it changed. The reflection on the glass darkened faster than it should. It seemed to pull the light inward. Marlene said she sometimes heard footsteps on the deck when she was alone. Not quick or startled ones, just slow, deliberate pacing, as if someone were rehearsing lyrics in their head. Eli laughed it off the first few times, until he began hearing faint snippets himself. A distant hum, low and musical, echoing inside the walls. Once, he even felt vibration through the floorboards, as if an amplifier was turned on somewhere below the house. But there was nothing in the crawlspace except wiring, dust, and the faint smell of old insulation. He called in a sound technician, a friend from his old band days, to help him trace the interference. The man brought portable analyzers and tone generators. They spent hours testing electrical noise, plugging and unplugging outlets, even opening the breaker box. Everything was within normal range until midnight approached. That was when the spectrum analyzer spiked. It wasn't white noise or static. It was tonal, structured, almost like a chord progression. The technician, frowning, turned down the gain and stared at the waveform. "Man, this isn't feedback," he said quietly. "It's something recorded. But I don't know from where." They isolated the frequency and replayed it through a monitor speaker. The sound that came out was faint but recognizable. A few guitar notes, brittle and wandering, followed by a short cough. The technician turned pale. "That's an open mic," he said. "Like someone hit record." Later that night, Eli searched the old shelves inside the control room and found a small box labeled in fading blue ink, Studio Violate Mix 1989. Inside were 5 cassette reels and a Polaroid of Tom Petty sitting at the same desk, grinning with a cigarette in hand. On the back, someone had written in ballpoint, "Don't erase the echo." The next day, Marlene left for her sister's house in Ventura, saying she needed a break. Eli stayed behind. He couldn't leave it alone, the mystery, the recordings, the strange feeling that the house was speaking in half-sentences. He bought an old reel-to-reel player off Craigslist, cleaned the heads, and began to digitize the tapes. The first 2 reels contained half-finished takes, laughter, background chatter, normal studio life. But the third one was different. Halfway through the track, the audio went flat, then resumed in total silence for 40 seconds. Out of that silence, a single voice came through, faint but clear, as if standing at the edge of the room. "Keep it rolling, we'll find it again." Eli froze. It wasn't eerie in tone. It was casual, confident, human. Yet it came with a presence, like someone brushing past your shoulder unseen. He replayed it several times. On the final loop, a soft distortion fluttered through his speakers, followed by the faint click of a lighter. The tape stopped by itself. That night, he went outside to smoke by the pool. The surface of the water shimmered under the patio lights, reflecting the palm trees like dark stains. The recording booth window was open, though he hadn't opened it. Inside, the small red bulb above the soundboard pulsed gently once, twice, like breathing. Eli walked closer, barefoot, the gravel cool beneath his feet. From the doorframe, he could see his own reflection in the studio glass, and behind it, another faint shape sitting at the control desk. Shoulders slightly hunched, head tilted toward the speakers. One hand resting where the fader marked Echo TP still stood raised. He blinked and the shape was gone. But when he stepped inside, the air smelled unmistakably of cigarette smoke and pine guitar polish. The house grew quieter after that. The strange sounds less frequent but not gone. Sometimes, when Eli played back the digitized recordings on his laptop, he'd catch a brief harmony at the end of a track, something that wasn't on the original reel. Marlene eventually returned, cautious but curious. Together, they decided to document everything properly: environmental readings, humidity, EMF scans, even decibel levels. They made no claims of haunting, only unexplained acoustic phenomena. The data showed subtle electrical surges each night at the same hour, never strong enough to trip a circuit, always localized to the studio's wiring. One evening, while reviewing the logs, Marlene noticed that the surges aligned perfectly with a set list written on a yellowed paper tucked behind the console. Each spike coincided with a song title. The last entry read simply, "Stop Draggin' My Heart Around Alt Mix." She turned to Eli. "You think it's just coincidence?" He didn't answer. He was staring through the control room glass again, where the faint outline of a man seemed to shimmer for an instant before dissolving into the dim light, leaving behind nothing but the echo of a chord still unresolved. And somewhere in the circuitry, the red bulb flickered once more. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Days passed, and Eli began to live by the rhythms of the house rather than his own. He no longer slept through the night. Instead, he found himself pacing the hallway at odd hours, drawn by that same quiet pulse from the studio. It wasn't fear that kept him awake, it was curiosity, a deep and unreasonable pull to understand what the house was trying to communicate. He had begun to treat it like a collaborator rather than a haunting, taking notes on when the power flickered, when the pool lights dimmed, when the temperature shifted by a single degree. He logged every anomaly into a spreadsheet, as if patterns could give him peace. By late July, the heat in the valley had turned oppressive. The house held it like a sponge, and even with the air conditioner running, the rooms felt dense. Marlene spent more time outside, under the shade of the magnolia trees, away from the studio's low hum. She tried to bring normalcy back, inviting friends for dinner, playing music through the speakers, but it never lasted long. The guests would always drift toward the back of the house, glancing uneasily down the narrow hallway that led to the glass doors. "It's weird," one of them said softly. "It feels like someone's listening from that room." Eli had stopped denying it. "Maybe someone is," he murmured. One evening, after the heat broke with a brief summer rain, Eli set up microphones throughout the studio to capture any residual sound. He left them recording while he stepped out to smoke. When he returned an hour later, the computer monitor was dark, though the power hadn't gone out. He tapped the keyboard, and the waveform display flickered to life, each channel showing steady, rhythmic peaks that shouldn't have been there. He hit play. At first it was only ambient noise, the patter of rain, a low hum. Then, faintly, a voice hummed along with the rhythm, soft, almost thoughtful, as if tuning up for a song. The melody was familiar, though he couldn't place it. It lasted for 17 seconds before the recording abruptly ended with a sharp click. He checked the logs. The file had been manually stopped at 11:43 p.m., exactly the same time the earlier anomalies had occurred. He didn't tell Marlene that night. She was already uneasy, and he didn't want to feed her fear. But later, as he lay awake, he thought he heard someone walking by the pool again. He sat up and looked through the window. The reflection was distorted by condensation, but he could swear he saw a faint orange glow like the ember of a cigarette hovering near the studio door. The next morning, Eli found wet footprints on the deck, bare feet but longer than his own. The rain had stopped hours before, and the pool waterline hadn't been disturbed. He crouched, tracing the prints with his finger, noticing how they faded halfway across the wood like someone had taken a few steps and vanished. Marlene confronted him later that day. "You've been acting like the house matters more than we do," she said. Her voice trembled, but it wasn't anger, it was exhaustion. "Whatever this is, it's taking something from you." He wanted to deny it, but she was right. The house had become an obsession. He felt closer to the unseen presence in the studio than to anyone else. "It's not about ghosts," he said quietly. "It's about energy. Maybe sound doesn't disappear, it just stays here, waiting for someone to listen." That night, he replayed the tapes once more. Each time the voice came through, it seemed clearer, closer. He layered the files in his audio software, syncing the frequencies. Together they formed a pattern, faint but intentional. Notes that lined up with a melody he finally recognized. Walls, from Tom Petty's later sessions. The refrain, "Some days are diamonds, some days are rocks," looped faintly in his head as he adjusted the EQ. The software's visualizer began to shimmer with interference, as though reacting to something external. Marlene came into the room, pale and silent. "Eli, the pool light's on again," she whispered. He followed her outside. The turquoise water glowed from beneath, but it wasn't the usual steady blue. It pulsed in uneven waves, flickering brighter with each beat, as though syncing with a rhythm only the house could hear. And then, faintly, from the open studio window, came the same voice as before, clearer this time, half-sung, half-spoken. "Let it ride. Just one more take." Marlene clutched his arm. "Tell me you heard that." He nodded, eyes fixed on the studio. "Yeah," he said softly. "I did." For the first time, they stepped inside together after midnight. The air was cool, still, and smelled faintly of rain and ash. The red bulb above the control board glowed steady, no longer flickering. A single fader was raised. The rest were down. On the desk, a piece of yellow paper fluttered slightly, though no draft moved. Marlene picked it up. It wasn't old, it was from their own notepad. Across the top, written in Eli's handwriting though he didn't remember writing it, were the words, "Track 4, don't erase the echo." She turned to him, her face drained of color. "Eli, you wrote this?" He opened his mouth, but nothing came. The house was completely silent now, except for the faint hiss of an open channel on the mixing console, waiting, patient, like a room expecting someone to speak first. The night stretched long and uneasy. The soft hum of the studio seemed to move through the walls like water through cracked stone, finding its way into every corner of the house. Eli sat by the console, motionless, staring at the soundboard while Marlene stood near the doorway, unwilling to cross the threshold. Neither of them spoke. There was a stillness in the air that felt heavier than silence, as though the very room was listening, waiting for them to act. Eli reached for the paper again. The words "don't erase the echo" seemed darker now, smudged slightly at the edges as if written with trembling hands. He turned it over. On the back, faint pencil marks outlined a waveform, jagged and imperfect, like the shape of a human breath captured on tape. He realized it matched the sound from the recordings, that single phrase repeating, "Let it ride, just one more take." He powered up the reel-to-reel machine, its spindles whining to life. The old bulbs on the console flickered on, filling the studio with a dim orange light. The machine clicked, hissed, and then began to play. At first, there was nothing but static. Then a faint guitar tone bled through, clean, warm, unmistakably analog. A few soft strums. Then a pause. And then the voice came again, deeper now, with that same steady patience. "Keep it steady. Feel it through." Marlene's hands gripped the doorframe. "Eli," she whispered, "turn it off." But Eli couldn't. He leaned closer to the monitors, his heart pounding with an ache that felt half awe, half dread. The sound wasn't random anymore. It was alive, responding, modulating slightly with every breath he took, as if the room itself was tracking him. The tape rolled on. Background noises surfaced. A chair scraping, a faint laugh, the snap of a lighter, then the unmistakable shuffle of someone setting down a guitar. Eli closed his eyes. He knew that sound. It was the same tone, the same rhythm from 100 live recordings. He could almost see it. A man in a worn denim jacket, cigarette smoke curling around the edge of a microphone. The ghost of melody suspended in the thick California air. Suddenly the machine stopped. The reels froze mid-turn. A faint hiss lingered from the speakers, not silence, but the sound of a room still occupied. And then, through that low hiss, a single chord rang out bright and perfect before dissolving into a low rumble that shook the console. The red recording bulb flared, glowing so bright it cast their shadows long across the wall. Eli pulled the plug from the wall. The light stayed on. He turned toward Marlene, but she wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on the glass window separating the control room from the recording booth. Her lips parted slightly. "Do you see that?" Through the glass, a figure sat in the dark, half-silhouetted, motionless. Shoulders slouched, head bowed forward. The faint shimmer of the pool light outside reflected just enough to outline the shape of a guitar resting across his knees. For a moment Eli felt no fear, only a deep, aching calm, the kind that comes when you finally understand something that was never meant to be explained. The figure didn't move, didn't look at them. It was simply there, part of the space, woven into the hum of wires and wood and memory. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the power in the house cut out. Everything went black. The only illumination came from the pool beyond the glass, its light pulsing faintly against the studio walls. Somewhere within that darkness, Eli heard a quiet shuffle, the scrape of a chair leg, the sound of someone standing. Then a voice, soft and near. "That's the take." When the lights returned, the booth was empty. The chair had been pushed back neatly under the desk, and the fader labeled Echo TP had been lowered to 0. The red bulb above it was dark. They didn't speak for a long time. Eli shut down the equipment carefully, his hands trembling. Marlene walked outside and stood by the pool, staring at the water until the ripples faded into stillness. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried in the hills. In the following weeks, the house grew quiet again. The strange sounds ceased. The air felt lighter. The power surges, the humming, even the faint smell of cigarettes all gone. They considered selling the place, but something held them there. Perhaps it was the sense that whatever had been unfinished was finally complete. Eli began writing about it, not as a ghost story, but as a study of resonance and memory, how certain frequencies might linger in materials, how vibrations could preserve emotion like a fossil in sound. Yet sometimes, when he played his own guitar late at night, He swore another tone would join him in harmony for just a moment, perfectly timed before fading away. Marlene never went back into the studio after that night, but she often sat by the pool at dusk, where the water still reflected the studio's outline. She said the house didn't feel haunted anymore, it felt grateful. One evening, months later, as Eli packed up old boxes, he found the yellow paper again. The handwriting had faded, but the words were still visible under the lamplight. "Don't erase the echo." He folded it carefully and placed it inside the drawer of the console before locking the studio door for good. The house has been sold twice since then. Neighbors say it's peaceful now, no strange lights, no music after midnight. But once in a while, when the valley wind drifts just right, someone swears they hear faint guitar notes coming from behind those stucco walls. Not eerie, not sad, just a man softly finding his rhythm again, somewhere between sound and silence.